Greetings, everybody, and welcome. Wopila, Wopila. It's wonderful to have so many people join us today. And this is our launch of our webinar series that we're going to be doing with the Native Center, featuring various speakers and contents on a monthly basis so that we can share information regarding disability rights, disability services, any new disability aspects for Indian country that we would like to address. So next month, we were going to have Treva Roanhorse do her presentation regarding OSERs and tribal voc rehab history and things of that nature, and how that can impact your communities. Today, we're very excited to have the coordinator of the Oyate Circle. The Oyate Circle out of University of South Dakota is a Native center for the UCED, the University Centers for Developmental Disabilities, that are national. So every state has a UCED, and we created the Oyate Circle at the University of South Dakota, and Wayne fortunately was able to come over and run our program. So he administers the Oyate Circle, and he lives in Rapid City. He's my Tahanshi, so we're relatives, so it's wonderful to be able to come home to South Dakota and work with him. And we're very proud of the Oyate Circle and the impacts that we've made in a short 4 years. We've been able to get to all 9 reservation communities, addressing the Oshete Shakoi, the 7 Council Fires nations, with the Lakota, Nakota, and Dakota nations forming the Great Sioux Nation, as we're called today. But this is a great opportunity to announce our new Native Center in Arizona, which is a sister program with our Oyate Circle in South Dakota. And we're planning to do a lot of collaborative work together. Wayne is actually contracted with the Native Center in Arizona, and this is one of the things that he's going to be able to share with us today. At the conclusion of Wayne's presentation, I'll share a couple more announcements regarding Oyate Circle as well as the Native Center and some upcoming training opportunities. So it's wonderful to see everybody introduce themselves in the chat. So welcome everybody. And it's my great pleasure to introduce Wayne Weston from the Oyate Circle. So Palami Atahashi.
Hey, thank you, Jim. And I want to say good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. I know that I'm kind of in the middle between the 2 time zones. So I'm talking to some people in the afternoon and some people in the morning still. So again, my name is Wayne Weston, and I am the coordinator for Oyate Circle here. I come from Oglala Lakota College, where I was the director of student affairs for several years, working with students with disabilities. Also, I've been doing a lot of the work, especially today, about internalized oppression for many, many, many years. I used to work in a domestic violence field, and I used to do training for individuals to look at how internalized oppression really plays a big part in our domestic violence. And so we try to educate people about this. And it's something that I've been doing for a very long time, but yet it's still almost not really out there yet where people really understand about internalized oppression. I think there's some hesitation to this because really when we talk about internalized oppression, we talk about belief systems. And I found that that's probably one of the hardest things that we're going to look at is belief systems that we've accumulated through a process of colonization. And so we forgot a lot about our traditional ways, our lives, our teachings, and so forth. So that's where we're going to kind of take this little journey in the next, within the next hour to talk about internalized oppression, to really understand what internalized oppression is. So those of you, I'd like you to do this, is to draw these 9 dots for me, please. Some of you can, look down, and if you can draw these 9 dots in this way, I want you to draw 4 lines through all 9 dots. And I'll give you, because of time restraints, I'm gonna give you 30 seconds to do this. So starting right now, draw the 4 lines through every single dot without crossing over twice. It has to be done once. And you got 15 seconds. If you can do this, I know I'm pushing you rapidly, but time constraint, we do kind of need to move through this. So now that you've looked at this and you're trying to figure out about these 4 lines, I'm going to show you them for, time-wise to look at. Here's the 1 line, there's 2 lines, there's 3 lines, and there's 4 lines. This is basically looking at what we're doing today, because what I found over the years doing this training, a lot of times people can't grasp what I'm talking about, because what's going on is that we're thinking inside the box. We're not allowing ourselves to think further out. And so
Wayne?
yes.
Sorry. Are you sharing your screen right now? Or?
Yes, I'm sharing my screen.
Oh, can you share it? Because I don't think it's popping up here.
Oh, really?
No, yeah.
Okay, hold on.
Because I'm kind of curious now to how you did the lines. Because I couldn't do it.
Well, it was on there. Share screen, hold on. Okay. You can see it now?
Yes, perfect.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. So here are the lines that I was talking about. And let's see here, what's going on?
Wayne, push share. There you go. Perfect.
Okay, so here are the 4 lines that I'm talking about. This is where you have to look outside think outside the box. And I think we've all heard that before, but the reason why I'm doing this, I really want you to understand that where I'm going to come from is a little bit different. You have to look at the thought as Native people and how we look at life, what happened to us. So basically, this whole concept about thinking outside the box, that's what we're going to do today. But also, additionally, we're going to think outside the circle. So this is, again, another process of thinking outside the circle. And what is that circle? How do we think outside the circle? Because today, when we talk about the circle, it's a definition. The circle is a definition from a Western thought and philosophy of the circle. And when you look at Native people, we have a different interpretation of that circle. It's different for us. It isn't concrete, because here I can say we need to think outside the circle, and looking at it from a Native perspective, this is what it's called, thinking outside the circle. It's a spiral, and this is the way, as Native people, the thought pattern of what we talk about and how we teach, our ancestors taught, was very much this way. And so this is where we're at today, and when we try to challenge these types of thoughts and teachings that our ancestors did, because you got to realize, as Native people, we had this concept way before. These are taken from different parts of the country of Native thought. And when we talked about the circle, so it's there that we look at the spiral. Everything was based upon the spiral. So as Native people, that's how our perception of our life was about. And all of our teachings was done in this way. And you look at, where did this come from? And I think, again, as Native people, we really understood, especially like myself as a Lakota, we have our stories about our creation from the Star Woman, that we had, it was the woman from one of the sisters from the stars of the Big Dipper, and the 7 stars there, and one of the sisters came down and created the two-legged. So that's how we look at this, because you look at the universe in itself, the universe is a spiral. The universe is not a circle. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at this in this particular way. Some of it, when you look at up here in the Great Plains region, you're going to look at our winter counts on the buffalo robes. Well, when you look at the winter counts, this is how they're written. This is how you read a written or a winter count in that aspect of a native thought and philosophy. It starts from the center and it spirals out. So you read the story in a spiral as it expands. And that's that philosophy that we go by as Native people. So I want to begin with this quote from Blackout, the holy man. And he talks about this incident that happened right after Wounded Knee. And he says, I can still see the butchered women and children lying in heap and scattered all along the crooked gulch as plain as when I saw them eyes still young. And he was talking about Wounded Knee Massacre. He was one of the people that came the day after Wounded Knee Massacre. He saw what happened. He was very, very upset. He was hurt. He just saw that this dream of a nation was now destroyed and there is nothing there any longer. And this is the effects of genocide. This was after the Wounded Knee Massacre, when he saw all of our people lying in the snow in this cold weather, which was the effects of genocide. And again, we have to look at how the beginning of internalized oppression, how did it really affect us? Because a lot of times we look at ourselves today and we realize that, well, this is the way we are today. And I'm telling people, no, it isn't. This isn't the way we are. You have to look at this. You have to change that view about who we are as Native people. If we're going to really be effective, if we're going to make change, we have to look at these things. And sometimes they can be painful. Sometimes they can challenge us in our own personal belief systems. But we have to look at this. This is something that as Native people, we have to understand that something did happen to us. We need to acknowledge that, even though the history books of this country won't acknowledge it, we need to acknowledge it as Native people. So when you look at the definition of genocide, because genocide really did happen to us as a people, and the United Nations Genocide Convention, which was established in 1948, defines genocide as acts committed with intent to destroy in whole or part a nation, ethnic, racial, or religious group. So this is that act, the definition of genocide. And you look at a lot of things that are written history, our oral history, and everything else talks about. This is what was going on. So you have some authors, including the Holocaust scholar David Cesareni, have argued the United States government policies, its furtherance of its so-called manifest destiny, constituted genocide. Some historians disagree, but the thing is that you have this author who was a Holocaust survivor and saying, you know what, manifest destiny constitutes genocide. And so you have that argument that people will talk about, that it did happen in this way as a people. So even for me, I wanted to research and look at and to say, okay, was there anything out there that helps to solidify this concept? And so you look at General Phil Sheridan, who said the only good Indian is a dead Indian. So you did have these people who had this belief that it was you have to destroy people. You had to get rid of people to genocide. Even down into George Washington, the first president of the United States, he said the immediate objectives are the total destruction and devastation of their settlements and the capture as many prisoners of every age, sex as possible. It will be central to ruin their crops in the ground and prevent their planting. So again, you look at history-wise, it was always there, even from the very first president. People look at Benjamin Franklin and say, well, you know, he flew the kite and independence and declaration, all these things, but yet in some of his writings, he talks about it is the design of providence to extirpate these savages in order to make room for cultivators of the earth. It seems not improbable, again, rum, alcohol, maybe the appointed means. And so you talk about chemical warfare because you look at alcohol, methanol alcohol, that it is a chemical breakdown. And again, if you know, people want to look at how alcohol has become a chemical, you come back and look at one of the terms that they use of alcohol today is hooch. Many of you have heard that name, hooch. Well, where did the word hooch come from? What does hooch mean? Hydrogen, 2 parts oxygen, carbon, hydrogen. That's the chemical makeup of ethanol alcohol. It's a chemical. So Ben Franklin was saying, use this chemical to do away with these people, annihilate them. So again, history, this is history. It's not, I'm not making this stuff up. It was in a lot of the stuff that was out there. So you look at biological warfare, so that's chemical warfare. And then biological warfare is also known as germ warfare. Again, this is the definition of biological warfare. It's a weapons of mass destruction. And again, you look at how this was done. You look at the oral history about our people, and we talk about the blankets that were given to us with smallpox. Well, again, that's called biological warfare. So that did happen. That was a part of genocide that they did. So looking at Western civilization, and one of the things I really found interesting about this is that history books blame it on all the other countries except this country. They said, well, we've never found anything, any documents or anything that showed it. And that's pretty weak argument, but they were trying to blame what was that called, misrepresenting or not being able to research this adequately, that they falsified documents, and they started to blame the people that talked about biological warfare, that this did happen, and tried to put that to rest, to say, no, it didn't happen, we didn't do it. But we know that there's many, many things of that. And when you look at the anatomy of warriors, and I use this for, especially up here in the Great Plains region, when we first encountered the cavalry, that was our first encounter. So many of us, our first encounter may have been with the Spaniards down in the Southwest. Maybe you go up to the Alaska area. The Russians were their first contact. You look at way up in the northeastern part of the country, the Vikings were there, and then you go to the lower part of the East Coast, and then you have your Pilgrims. So we all had first contacts, and for us in the middle part of the country, our first contact was probably the French, and then eventually our first contact was with the cavalry. And so when the cavalry first came, the average height of a cavalry soldier in 18 excuse me, I'm just getting over a cold. So their average height was 5'8" with a diet of salt pork, hardtack, and whiskey. Whereas the average height of a Lakota warrior in the 1800s was 6'3", and their diet was of lean buffalo meat, berries, and spring water. And that was that you look at that anatomy of these two warriors, and during the 1800s, they did not have the repeating rifles yet. And so what they did was they had the muzzle loaders, and the muzzle loaders, I use this example that if a soldier, the muzzle loader is not an accurate weapon. And so probably majority of the times they won't hit the target that they're shooting at. But you have a soldier whose diet of salt, pork, hardtack, and whiskey, I don't think their eyesight was that good at that time. And a lot of times at 100 yards, they shot at a Lakota, they missed. While the Lakota, being a 6'3" and perfect health, took off running at that warrior, it's going to take less than 9 seconds for him to get there, whereas it's going to take him at least a minimum of 30 seconds to reload that muzzle loader. And so who's going to win in a hand-to-hand battle? Because that's what eventually is going to have to happen. So it was at this time that they knew that we were very healthy people. We had the ability to protect and to preserve our way of life at this time. So what happened was that they started to use the smallpox. And so it began in the 1754 when the French and Indian Wars and commander of Fort Pitt soldiers distributed blankets that had been used by smallpox patients with intention outbreaks of American Indians. So it killed more than 50% of infected tribes at that time. In 1763, British waged biological warfare with smallpox. The British smallpox contaminated blankets of the Shawnee and the Lenape, Delaware communities. So again, the British officer, Sir Geoffrey Amherst, and his replacement, General Thomas Gage, they were the ones that used biological warfare effectively. And then you come over here to the Midwest part of the country, the smallpox epidemic in the 1837s all but destroyed the Mandans and severely reduced the Arikaras and Hidatsa. And again, that was just right north of here. And, you know, when we talk about history, a lot of times what we want to do is we're going to take, well, what's that based upon Western historical documents? And you can basically whitewash the whole thing if you wanted to, if a person wanted to use that process of saying, look at it from my point of view, it didn't happen. Well, from my point of view as a Native person, it did happen. And one of the oral histories we hear about here in my part of the country is that the Mandan, Hidatsa, and Arikara were our traditional enemies at one time. And what happened was that between 1837 and 1838, they sent a bunch of warriors down, scouts down to the Lakotas from up north. And they said, listen, you know, our people were dying. Something's going on. Our people are sick and we can't hunt. We can't protect ourselves. Can you guys help us? And we were traditional enemies at that time. But what our leaders did at that time in history was they created this massive hunka ceremony, and hunka means making of a relative. And so they did this ceremony to make the Mandan, Hidatsa, and Arikara our relatives. And so once we did that ceremony, our leaders sent warriors up there to the three affiliated tribes and hunted and protected them until they were able to get well. So even in our oral history as Lakota, we had that. We understood of what happened to our relatives at that time through that oral history. And so again, does oral history have any evidence behind that? And again, it comes from that point of view as Native people. So you look at back over here in our area of the country in 1891, when they systematically slaughtered our buffalo, because that was another approach of genocide, was that you seen our people were malnourished. We were severely malnourished at one time because we couldn't eat buffalo. There's nothing to eat up here during that time. We couldn't survive, and they killed everything. And again, that was a part of the process of genocide. So all this took place until the Battle of Greasy Grass, or the Battle of the Little Bighorn. And that was the end of covert genocide. I mean, I know that it continued afterwards, but overall, that movement was to the only dead Indian or good Indian is a dead Indian. That mentality started to fade, and they started to approach in a different way. So we went through this. We had gone through a lot of this. So when genocide failed, external oppression happened. And this is where we look at what happened to us today, because through that, we had attempted genocide, treaties, religion, boarding schools, reservation systems, all these things just started to compound over what we've been going through. And we've seen this. We talk about this even to today. We're still dealing with the boarding school issues that are going on in Canada and the United States. And, I was looking at this one film about the boarding school experience with the Indigenous people in Australia, and they went through the same thing as well as many, many other nations went through this. So when you look at this process of what happened was they start to change that approach. So what happened is that when I look at our life today as Native people, you look at the circle. This was our reality. This was our natural way of life. But what happens is that it was pushed so far that it started to put that pressure upon our way of life, like that. Let's say this was a balloon, and if I had you sitting on a balloon, what happens to the balloon? The balloon explodes. And I always tell people, I hope that it explodes laterally and not upward or downward, because then there'd be a real problem. But most often that explosion happens on a lateral level. And this is that process as through genocide, when they try to really use this external oppression that happened, they pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed until that natural way of life burst. And so this is that result of that burst through, as we call, lateral or horizontal violence. And with that, this is what we all see today. This is the result of today. All of us are dealing with this in so many different areas. We look at violence against our own people, human trafficking, chemical dependency, murder, economic abuse, and the list goes on and on and on. And again, this list here is just the tip of the iceberg, because it goes on. And the thing about this is that there's no one out there doing this to us but ourselves. It's our own people that are doing this. This is the result of that external oppression when it explodes. And this is where what we see today happening on our within our communities, our reservations, or wherever we come from. This is what's going on today. This is what we're faced with. We're faced with all of this coming around us, and we're trying to really understand this. And how do we deal with this? Well, what I showed you just previously before this is that we have to understand this part. This part has to be understood, that there was a genocide, there was external oppression. We need to be able to take that and let that become a part of our lives, to understand that if we're going to heal, we have to know that this is a reality. It really did happen to us. And once that's done, then we look at, as the result of that external oppression, when it turns into internalized oppression, this is what happens to us as a people. So a lot of times the justification of this comes from so many points of view. Governor William Henry Harrison in Indian Territory says, one of the fairest portions of the globe to remain in a state of nature, the haunt of a few wretched savages, when it seems destined by the Creator to give support to a large population and to be the seat of civilization. Destined by the Creator. Well, that's what the whole concept of manifest destiny was about. And this, again, I love a lot of my teachings. I do visual. And I said, you know, this is probably the best visual effects of internalized or manifest destiny, that it was the providence of the Creator to say that we have to do this. God made us do this. So if anybody wants to get blamed for how many people we killed and the land we took, it's God's fault, because it was ordained by Him. And that's what manifest destiny is. And I think I can say this with authority, because I am a theologian. I studied this very intensely for 3 years, and this is exactly what that means. And so here we are as Native people. You look at this portrait where you see them moving out, and they're being pushed out by civilization. And so we were just considered savages, just like the animals. So when you talk about that external oppression, the unjust exercise of authority and power by one group over another, it includes imposing one group's belief system, values, lifeways over another group. This unjust exercise was justified through using concepts such as manifest destiny and doctrine of discovery. Richard Henry Pratt is best known as the founder and longtime of Carlisle Indian School, and his belief was kill the Indian and save the man. So basically, he was saying that we need to get rid of all of their belief systems, their spirituality, everything, even their history, so that we're going to actually save the man. And so henceforth, what we do is, many of us, I remember growing up cheering for John Wayne when he came over the hill, and the poor settlers were being attacked by the savage Native people. And when you heard that bugle sound, I used to cheer, because they were saving. And I knew that inside of me, there must be something wrong. Why am I cheering? Why am I celebrating the 4th of July when I wasn't even considered a citizen until the 1700s or 1970s? And so you look at this, it's something that for us as Native people, how our change and everything came. So the internalized oppression happens when we start to believe and act as if the oppressor's belief system, values, and lifeway becomes our own. And that's where we're at today. We see a lot of this. A lot of times you get a person like me to come and talk about this. Oh, well, that's a radical. That's a person who's a radical, and he's talking way beyond what's that reality. And that's what happens, is that when people start to address internalized oppression, we're negated. We're be called radicals or whatever else that people want to utilize. But that's how it's done. You negate that. You try to control that so that this information doesn't get out. Internalized oppression means the oppressor does not have to exert any more pressure. We now do it to each other and ourselves. And that's where that lateral violence comes from. So you understand this. And, I was doing this one time. I was doing this lecture in Dublin, Ireland. And I was doing this lecture on internalized oppression. And, a lot of people afterwards came up and people were crying and they were sharing. And I didn't realize how much the Irish people, what they went through is almost identical to us here that happened in this continent. And they had a lot of internalized oppression issue, and they had an abundance of lateral violence, how they did it to each other, and the wars, the battles they were having up there in Ireland in the northern part. And so you realize that it's nothing new. It happened to many other nations. They went through this just as we are. And so it isn't that this didn't only happen to us. It happened in Ireland and happened in many, many other countries, many countries. Some of these countries are of all colors. And so you just can't take it down to one particular. This internalized oppression is something that happens to all people. And that's something we need to really get to understand. So when you look at the results of internalized oppression, shame and disowning of our individual and cultural reality, we don't see the value of those today in our society. And I see this starting to change. And I've been doing this for over 20 years, this particular presentation, and I see some changes happening today. And I'm very pleased with that because many, many of our people are starting to look at our cultural reality, lack of knowledge. And I think, again, one of the things that I found myself doing, I do a lot of cultural competency training. And I find myself doing that more and more and more with our own indigenous communities because there's a very limited knowledge of cultural teachings. And so again, you look at that and how do we look at our cultural teachings? How do we teach each other? And so I've been developing concepts like native cognitive teaching and learning process, that there's a way that our ancestors taught that information stayed within ourselves. This is why we look at oral history, because there is something about oral history that our ancestors knew. We didn't have a written language, but we were able to utilize different sciences of teaching, or they call it pedagogy or pedagogy. They use that in order to ensure that those teachings will be passed on to the next generation. So actually, I do have a training material that I've been doing now recently for the last few years to talk about how do we teach? And I think that's, again, if we're going to teach culture, we can't teach it in a box that keeps us within that way of thinking. We also can't teach it in a circle, because that circle also has been defined by Western thought and philosophy, that the circle also can oppress us. So a lot of times we try to teach this in our classrooms. I'll give you an example, language. We try to teach our children language in the classroom using Western thought and philosophy to teach our children to talk the language, but never really understanding the full meaning of that language. And again, that loses that whole process of what that language really means. And so we're not getting the full effect of that teaching of our ancestors. So this is, again, the things that we have to challenge ourselves as educators, as practitioners, as people out there in the community. We need to start looking at different ways of doing this and challenging those thought and philosophies that's been really oppressing us. Horizontal violence is to levels of violence and rape, suicide, all of these, you look at what's happening in our communities, and this is the result of internalized oppression. So this is something I really think that we need to look at as Native people, because we're not looking at the overall picture of what we need to do to really change. And a lot of times I feel that people get frustrated, they get discouraged because they're not making any movement. Several years ago, I was doing this talk to the up here, it's called a Great Plains Tribal Chairman's Health Board. And they asked me to do a keynote. And I talked about this, and I said, you know, in the 1980s, the early 1980s, the statistics of unemployment and alcoholism on reservation was at 75%. Well, that was like 20 years ago, and 20 years later, and I'm telling them is that today, has that gone down? Has that 75% of alcoholism and chemical dependency and poverty gone down? And today, when you look at the latest statistics, it's 85% now. So what does that tell us? It tells us that everything that we've been learning from the Western society has not been effective, because we're trying to adjust to their way of thinking when that's not even us. It's just like what they wanted to do in the Indian schools, the boarding schools, was to kill the Indian but save the man. Well, saving that man meant thinking like us, being like us. And that's what's going on. And so when I told that to this audience, and I said, nothing changed. As a matter of fact, it got worse. So all of us, when we start to really think about how do we make change and with our people in those communities, how do we make change? Because a lot of times what we come in from a different perspective, a different worldview, and we want people to change according to that, rather than looking at them and to saying, what is it that you need? Well, they need their worldview back. They need that back if they're going to make any kind of change. And that's the important part of this lesson. So when you look at examples, I mean, we bought into so much of these different belief systems. When I was in a domestic violence field, I had Native men saying, a man's home is his castle. And I'm like, whoa, wait a minute, dude. I researched this continent on this side of the world, and we never had castles. Where did you get that belief that a man's home is his castle? Or you look at marriage, the English law. It's about the surname. It's about the woman becoming chattel, and it's exchange of chattel. It's exchange of property when the man gives the hand to the husband and to say, I give her. And so what happens is her surname is changed from her father's to her husband's. Again, that wasn't our belief system, but today we start to have that. And so all of a sudden we're becoming confused. And when it's not running right for us, well, our Native men, they understand about power and control. They use those tactics. See, again, this is what's going on to where we may think that we're progressing, but we're not. We're digressing because of the fact that we're buying into a lot of belief systems that were not ours. So when I talk about healing from internalized oppression, I only have two things that I tell people. It's simple. The first one is to relearn how to live life through your own belief systems, values, and lifeways. Again, that's going to have to be a part of where we need to sit down. We need to look at what was those belief systems. You know, it's a mitakwe oyase. We are all related. Everything, the universe, everything on this planet all the two-legged, the four-legged. That's our belief system. You know, those are the things that we need to go back to. And then finally, finding a balance, living in two worlds, only taking the good and leaving the bad. So manifest destiny, when I look at manifest destiny, this is what people are talking about. For as Native people, this is what we saw when we talked about manifest destiny. So when you talk about manifest destiny, it's destined by the Creator. Well, we're disagreeing with that. No, this is what we see. We saw massive death, Holocaust, massive millions of people dying, taking things that we had, putting us into things that were very unnatural to us and making us think unnatural thoughts. This is what's going on. So what I'm telling people, this is what we must do. We have those teachings about all of our cultures. Our cultures have teachings about how to live in balance in life and how to keep that. And what's really remarkable about this portrait, look at that we are all related. But the thing is that below this, you see that we have allies. You see a lot of our non-native people here that are also being a part of this. And so we look at this life that we have, and I think that a lot of our cultural teachings, we need to bring this back. We need to challenge things that stop us from doing this. I know that there are many people out there who are trying to do this today, but I think that once we get on to this, this is what I see for myself, looking at this from a Native person, is that we have to start looking back upon our culture, those true teachings, not something that was taken and redefined in the Western society. So again, I know I've really kind of gone through this rather quickly, but I just in time frame, I wanted to get you to maybe start thinking about this, to look at what we must do, what we have to do. And I think this is where we start that beginning of healing. So again, thank you all for your patience. I hope that I gave you some information to help you. And I'm going to turn this over to my colleague at this time, Jim, and let you take it.
Palamia, Washtelo Tahashi. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom. And if we could just keep this screen on for a little while as we address any questions. Are there any questions or clarifications or comments that we can share with the group before we move on to our closing?
We did have a question about whether the slides will be available. Is that something that we can share?
Oh, yes. Wayne and I always share our presentations, and they'll be available on our website. So both the Arizona and South Dakota websites will have these available as training resources. Any comments, questions? I know that I always learn something every time. I mean, Wayne and I have done, 100 presentations together at least. And I always learn more and more from them. And it's fun doing this work because we can research more, not only into the clinical aspects and the disability impacts and those elements, but we also can learn more about how we can face our own internalized oppression issues as Native people working together. And then, as Wayne said, our allies are key for success. And we have many, almost 100 allies together today. And we're all here to do something. How can we understand some of these issues that my clientele or my family or my friends or community members are going through? And this just brings back some of those things that we all have as Native people who know our history and have that desire to keep our languages going and our culture and our perspectives. And protocol of who we are as Indigenous people. We want that to continue and be respected as we live with our allies in contemporary America. So that's kind of what we approach our work with, my Tahanshi Wayne and I, through the Oyate Circle, as well as our new Native Center here in Arizona. So if there's no more questions or comments, we can move towards the closing. And again, thank you so much for your participation. We will be doing monthly webinars. So that's something that we're very excited about, having monthly webinars. And Treva Roanhorse, one of my mentors, will be presenting next month. So look for that announcement. We're looking mid-June for her presentation. So we'll be doing these on a monthly basis, and send in suggestions for subject matters that we can address for our community members. You are now part of our Tioshpae, our community of allies that are providing those services and making a difference, not only for Indian country, but for all of us as human beings that have disabilities. So are there any
Jim,
other...
I just wanted to chime in here, but session 2 is scheduled already. It's for Friday, June 17th at 11
Hey, Wayne,
a.m.
can
and
you
the registration link is in the chat.
Yeah, can you unshare your screen, Wayne, now? And that's a beautiful picture of our white buffalo calf woman from our Lakota perspective. So thank you so much again, Wayne. Palamia, Wopila, thank you for sharing today. And again, join us on a monthly basis. We'll have these scheduled and get that information out there for you. So in the chat, you have the link for Treva's presentation next month. And if I could share my screen, am I able to share my screen? I don't know if I'm...
Yep, you are, Jim.
All righty. So here we have, again, what we just participated in with this Disability Center, but are you able to see this? As Wayne mentioned, this is my next film we're releasing, and I plan to show it on our webinar series addressing the impacts of the boarding school that Wayne referenced. Again, in 1 hour, we can't cover all the impacts of internalized oppression and historical trauma, and some of those things that many of our people are dealing with that we're working with. So again, when you think of opportunities to educate people, that I'm able to make films, and this is in honor of the children at the Rapid City boarding school. And this film will be announced, released next month, but we will have it on our series so that you can see it on the webinar series before it's out to the public. So this is another announcement. And then with the Oyate Circle, hopefully you can see this as well. Wayne and I will be hosting a first responders disability awareness training in Rapid City, South Dakota with the Oyate Circle. And we plan to do some of this work in Arizona as well. So again, a lot of the work we're doing in Oyate Circle in South Dakota will be doing in Arizona, as well as sister programs. And thank you to all the South Dakota folks that joined us today, as well as, of course, not only our 22 tribes in Arizona, but all the tribal nation representatives that joined us, as well as our allies for joining us today. So I'll stop the share at this point. Whoops. And then, so again, we look forward to hosting our next webinar next month. And again, keep up the great work. All of you are making good footprints or wheel prints or walker prints, whatever your situation may be. Keep making those good prints and impacts for future generations. And the work you do not only impacts the people you work with, but the families and the communities of which they live. So Palamia Washtelo, we look forward to seeing you next month. And go to our website for more announcements, and keep up the good work. Thank you so much.